Imagine an ancient justice system where the ultimate goal of this terrifying, highly public trial isn't actually to reach a guilty verdict.
Right, which sounds completely counterintuitive to us.
Exactly. I mean, you'd think the point of a trial is the verdict, but here, the entire spectacle is designed to make the defendant so incredibly uncomfortable, just so psychologically pressured, that they crack. They just confess before the trial even reaches its climax.
It's essentially an elaborate psychological trap. Like, the system doesn't actually want the trial to finish. It wants the truth to surface before they pass the point of no return.
And that is exactly what we're jumping into today. Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Usually, when you pick up a thousands of years old religious document, you expect, I don't know, rigid laws, dusty rituals, things that have zero overlap with modern life.
Oh, absolutely. You expect irrelevant history.
Right. But the stack of sources we're exploring today completely shatters that expectation. We are looking at excerpts from the Talmud specifically, tractate Sotah, along with the really brilliant, exhaustive medieval commentary by a scholar known as Rashi.
And look, at first glance, I admit, this material seems entirely unrelatable. It outlines a highly specific, very ancient ritual concerning a suspected adulteress, who is referred to as the sotah.
Yeah, the sotah.
Right. And it takes place in a world with, a central temple, priests, and literal divine curses.
But, and this is the mission for our deep dive today, we want you to look past that archaic legal framework. Because when you strip away the ancient setting, what you actually have is this absolute masterclass in human psychology.
It really is.
We're going to explore the anatomy of jealousy, the self-destructive nature of arrogance, and this grand sweeping concept of how the universe acts as an exact mirror to our own choices.
Which is such a fascinating progression. But to understand that psychology, you really have to understand the boundaries the text sets up first.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So the entire framework of the sotah relies on two very distinct, highly formalized phases. The first phase is called kinui, and the second is called stira.
Kinui and stira. Let's break those down, because the mechanism here is actually brilliant.
Yeah, so kinui translates to a formal warning. And we're not talking about a husband just feeling a bit paranoid or, checking his wife's messages or giving her the silent treatment.
Right, none of that passive-aggressive stuff.
Exactly. That kind of simmering, unspoken resentment doesn't trigger anything in this legal system. Kinui is an explicit verbal warning given by a husband to his wife, stating very clearly that she is not to be secluded with one specific man.
Just putting it entirely out in the open.
Yes. And the really critical detail here is that this warning is entirely invalid unless it is delivered in front of two witnesses.
Wow, okay, so it has to be public, or at least formally documented. I mean, you can't just claim, oh, I warned her after the fact.
You absolutely cannot. The system requires two witnesses just to establish that the boundary was even set. Now, the second phase, stira, is the actual act of seclusion.
Okay, so crossing the line.
Right. If the woman ignores that formalized warning and is seen going into a private, enclosed space with that specific man for a certain amount of time, that is stira. And for that, the text says you only need one witness.
Just one witness for the seclusion.
Exactly. And once that line is crossed, the woman is legally forbidden to her husband, and this triggers the intense ritual of the sotah.
Looking at this through a modern psychological lens completely changes the flavor of the text for me.
How so?
Well, it's so easy to write kinui off as just ancient institutionalized jealousy, men controlling women. But if you strip away the gender dynamics of the ancient world for a second and just look at the underlying mechanism, it's actually this brilliant tool for establishing explicit hard-line boundaries.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Because think about a modern relationship. The most toxic thing you can do is hold on to a vague suspicion or an uncommunicated boundary.
Oh, completely. The silent resentment.
Exactly. Your partner is left guessing why you're upset, the resentment just builds, and it rots the marriage from the inside out. Unspoken suspicion is way more destructive than the actual conflict.
It really is. It creates a completely unstable foundation.
So what this ancient law does is force the issue out into the light. The ultimate consequence, this terrifying trial ritual, cannot be triggered by mere paranoia. It requires a documented communication of a boundary first.
It demands that you say out loud, this specific behavior crosses a line for me.
Yes. It forces all those hidden corrosive doubts into the open where they actually have to be dealt with.
And if we look at the broader structure of the text, the ancient commentators were incredibly aware of how one small blurred boundary leads to total destruction. I mean, Rashi points out a fascinating structural detail here.
I love when Rashi gets into the structure. What does he say?
Well, the Talmud is organized into various books, or tractates, and Rashi asks, why does the book of Sotah immediately follow the book of Nazir?
For context, a Nazir being someone who takes a religious vow to swear off drinking wine entirely.
Right. So what does swearing off wine have to do with a suspected adulteress? Rashi explains that the sequence is actually a psychological warning.
Oh, interesting.
The text is arguing that anyone who witnesses the tragic, degrading results of the sotah's actions should immediately be inspired to take the vow of the Nazir. They should swear off the intoxication that led to her downfall in the first place.
It's a domino effect.
Exactly. Wine leads to a lowering of inhibitions. Lowered inhibitions lead to blurred social boundaries. Blurred boundaries lead to seclusion. And seclusion leads to the destruction of a family.
That makes so much sense. It's recognizing that massive betrayals, they almost never happen in a vacuum. They're the result of like 100 tiny, seemingly harmless compromises.
Yes, exactly.
But if those boundaries are crossed, if that explicit warning of kinui is totally ignored, the mechanism activates. And reading through the historical accounts of the actual sotah ritual, I gotta say, this is where things get intensely uncomfortable.
It is a severe, extreme intervention. There's no getting around that. The woman is brought to the central temple in Jerusalem, and the text describes a process designed for maximum public humiliation.
Just brutal stuff.
The priest brings her forward. Her hair is uncovered and unbraided. Her garments are torn, so her chest is partially exposed. And she is tied with a coarse Egyptian rope just to keep her clothes from falling off completely.
Wow.
She is placed in a position of extreme, agonizing vulnerability in front of whoever wants to watch.
Okay, I really have to push back on this on behalf of our listeners, because reading that today, the immediate reaction is just that this is straight up cruelty.
It's hard to read, definitely.
Yeah, right. Breaking someone down publicly like that, especially considering she hasn't actually been proven guilty of adultery, only of being secluded after a warning, it feels barbaric. I mean, she might be completely innocent of the core accusation.
I hear you. It looks incredibly cruel to our modern sensibilities, absolutely. We live in a society that prioritizes individual dignity above almost everything else.
Exactly. Dignity is paramount.
But you have to look at the hierarchy of values in this ancient theocratic society. To them, the temporary humiliation of an individual is a lesser evil compared to the cosmic tragedy that is about to occur if she is lying. We have to understand the climax of the ritual to really grasp the psychological pressure at play here.
Okay, the climax. You're talking about the bitter waters.
Right. The final step of the ritual involves the woman drinking a concoction of water, earth from the temple floor, and ink.
Yeah.
To make this water, the priest writes a specific passage from the Torah on a parchment.
And that passage has some weight to it.
Immense weight. That passage contains the explicit holy name of God. The parchment is then submerged into the water, and the ink, including the divine name, is literally dissolved and erased into the drink.
Which, in the ancient Jewish framework, is a massive taboo.
Oh, it is an unthinkable tragedy. Sacred texts with the name of God aren't even thrown away. They are buried with honors. Intentionally erasing the name of God is one of the strictest prohibitions in the culture.
They do it here.
They do. The text says God actively allows his own name to be erased in this specific ritual for one reason: for the chance of restoring peace and trust between a husband and wife.
Wow.
It's a profound statement about the value of marital harmony. God basically says, erase my name to heal their home.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
A massive catch. God allows the erasure for the sake of peace, but if the woman is actually guilty and she drinks the water while maintaining a lie, well, the erasure of God's name was for absolutely nothing.
It was erased for a falsehood.
Exactly. And that is a spiritual catastrophe that the court wants to avoid at all costs.
Okay, so that really reframes the entire spectacle. So the entire public humiliation, the tearing of the clothes, the unbraiding of the hair, the massive crowd, it's all a psychological pressure cooker.
Yes.
It's essentially a bluff to force her to crack. The court is basically saying, we are going to make the pretense of your innocence so agonizingly heavy that if you are hiding the truth, you will just drop the act.
That's exactly it. Rashi is very explicit about this strategy. The priest actually tells her, look, much happens because of wine, much happens because of bad company, just admit it.
Giving her an out.
Right. And if she confesses under this intense pressure, yes, she loses her financial marriage settlement, the marriage ends, and she walks away in disgrace.
Right.
But she is spared the lethal divine punishment of the waters. And most importantly to the court, the name of God doesn't have to be erased for a lie. The system prioritizes ultimate truth over temporary comfort. It strips away all ego.
It strips away all ego. But, that implies the ego involved here is staggering. Think about it. If you know you're guilty, and you know the stakes involve divine punishment and a terrifying public ordeal, you would just confess immediately and walk away?
You'd think so.
To endure the torn clothes, the crowds, and the threat of the bitter waters just to avoid admitting you were wrong. I mean, that takes an unbelievable amount of arrogance.
And that is exactly where the commentators take the discussion next. What drives a person to cross these boundaries and risk everything rather than just confess?
Right. What's the root of it?
The root of the entire ordeal is traced back to a single fundamental human flaw, which is pride. The text has an absolute, uncompromising zero-tolerance policy for arrogance.
It views pride not just as like a character flaw, but as the engine of all destructive behavior.
Exactly. The commentators warn that pride inevitably leads to forgetting God entirely. The logic is fairly simple. When you're completely full of yourself, your ego expands to take up all available space.
There's no room for anyone else.
None. There is simply no room left for anything or anyone else. Not a partner, not a community, and certainly not a higher power. God, the text argues, detests a haughty heart, because a haughty heart leaves no room for truth.
I love the poetic contrast the sources use to explain this dynamic. They compare human beings to two things: flesh and earth.
Oh, that's a beautiful metaphor.
It really is. A humble person is compared to soft flesh. If flesh gets wounded or cut, what happens? It yields. But more importantly, it heals. It knits back together.
Right, it adapts.
But a proud person is compared to hard earth or stone. If you strike a stone, it doesn't yield. It resists the impact until it cracks. And once it shatters, it cannot heal itself.
It's a brilliant insight into the nature of vulnerability, the humility of soft flesh. That willingness to say, hey, I was wrong or I made a mistake, is the exact mechanism that allows for repair in a relationship. When you are rigid and unyielding like stone, the slightest impact shatters the dynamic entirely. The tragedy of the sotah, fundamentally, is a tragedy of rigidity. It is the refusal to yield, the refusal to admit a mistake, all to protect a really fragile ego.
Which reminds me of baking a cake, actually.
Baking a cake.
Hear me out. Because while the text condemns pride as this destructive, shattering force, I found a fascinating caveat in our sources. It explicitly says that a Torah scholar, essentially a leader or a judge, actually needs a microscopic amount of pride.
Oh, yes.
The text specifies they need exactly 1/8 of an eighth of pride.
Which is 1/64.
Yes, 1/64. It's such an incredibly specific, tiny fraction, but it makes perfect sense if you think about a cake recipe.
Okay, how so?
If you dump a cup of salt into the batter, the cake is completely ruined. It's inedible. Pride is the salt. Too much destroys everything. But if you put absolutely zero salt in the recipe, the cake falls flat. The flavors just don't pop. It doesn't work. A leader needs that tiny pinch of salt, that 1/64 of pride, just to keep from falling flat when challenged. It gives them the backbone to stand their ground when the truth demands it.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The text recognizes that absolute, pure self-effacement isn't practical in the real world. If a judge has zero ego, they're just going to be trampled by anyone with a stronger will.
They need to be able to uphold the law.
Right, they need just enough authority to say this is the law and you will listen. But it's an incredibly delicate balance. The moment that 1/64 becomes a 1/32, you risk becoming the hard earth that shatters.
So how does this battle between pride and humility actually play out in the world? Because the idea that specific psychological flaws result in specific downfalls, that introduces the grandest, most sweeping theme of this entire text.
It really does. It's the concept the ancient rabbis called meta keneged mita.
Measure for measure.
Exactly. The idea that the universe acts as a perfect, unbroken mirror. It echoes your exact actions back to you. The consequence, whether it's a punishment or a reward, always mirrors the exact nature of the deed.
And we see that apply to the sotah right away.
We do. The text argues that she sinned with her body. She used her physical form and her appearance to transgress the boundary, and therefore the bitter waters punish her physical body first. The consequence is inextricably tied to the specific nature of the choice.
Man, that is dark. And then there's Absalom, King David's rebellious son.
Yes. Absalom was incredibly vain about his appearance, specifically his thick, beautiful hair. He used his charisma and his looks to steal the hearts of the people and launch a rebellion against his own father.
And how did he die?
While fleeing in battle, his magnificent hair got tangled in the thick branches of a tree, trapping him in midair where he was killed. He was literally snared by the exact thing he was most proud of.
You know, when you just look at the punishments, it almost sounds vindictive, like the universe is playing a cruel, ironic joke on these people.
You can definitely read that way.
But understanding the psychology of it changes everything. Measure for measure isn't just karma, it is an educational tool.
Oh, absolutely.
Why do we need the consequence to perfectly match the crime? Because human beings are masters of denial. If Samson merely broke his leg in battle, he would have written it off as bad luck.
He never would have connected it to his moral failings.
Exactly, but losing his eyes, the exact instrument of his betrayal, that pierces the denial. It points directly to the flaw.
It forces introspection. It creates a universe of profound poetic justice, where our choices echo back to us in a language we can perfectly understand. And it's crucial to note that this cosmic mirror works for virtue just as precisely as it works for sin.
The positive feedback loop.
Yes. Rashi points to Miriam, the older sister of Moses. When Moses was an infant placed in a basket in the Nile River to save him from Pharaoh's decree, Miriam stood by the riverbank and waited to see what would happen to him.
She guarded him.
She guarded him in his moment of absolute, terrifying vulnerability. Decades later, Miriam was struck with leprosy in the desert and had to be quarantined outside the camp for a week. As a reward for her waiting, the entire nation of Israel, millions of people, halted their journey and waited 7 days for her to heal before moving onward.
Oh.
She waited for one helpless infant, so a nation of millions waited for her, measure for measure.
I gotta be honest, that gave me chills when I first read it in the sources. The symmetry is just breathtaking.
It really is.
And it happens with Joseph, too. Despite being the second most powerful man in Egypt, Joseph personally took the time and effort to bring his father Jacob's body all the way back to the land of Canaan for burial.
Right, a massive undertaking.
Because Joseph took on that burden, who took care of Joseph's bones when the Israelites finally left Egypt, Moses himself. And because Moses took on that sacred duty when Moses died alone on a mountain, the text says God himself buried Moses.
The implication is a universe of incredible, intricate design. Every action, every tiny exertion of will has an exact proportional reaction in the cosmic ledger.
Which brings us to the final, most complex concept from our sources today. If the universe is this intricate, perfectly balanced mirror, how does this cosmic math apply to the most difficult, chaotic human connection of all? How does this apply to marriage?
This is where Rashi's commentary moves from psychology to deep, deep philosophy. The Talmud presents what looks like a glaring, irreconcilable contradiction about how human beings are matched up.
Okay, what's the contradiction?
On one hand, it claims that 40 days before a child is even conceived, a heavenly voice declares exactly who they are going to marry.
Pure destiny. Maisel, your partner is chosen for you before you even draw a breath.
Pure destiny. But on the exact same page, another part of the text claims that people are paired strictly based on their deeds. Righteous people are matched with righteous people. Deceitful people are matched with deceitful people.
Okay, so which is it?
Right, the commentators ask, are you marrying your predetermined destiny, or are you marrying a reflection of your own moral choices?
The way the text resolves this paradox is so brilliant. It says both are true, but they apply to different stages of life. The first marriage, it says, is destiny. That's the heavenly voice 40 days before conception.
Yes.
But the second marriage is based strictly on your deeds.
And here is the profound insight Rashi adds. He notes that matching people based on their deeds is, quote, as difficult as splitting the Red Sea.
That is such a vivid, sort of bizarre metaphor. The splitting of the Red Sea is considered the ultimate reality-breaking miracle in this tradition.
It is the pinnacle of miracles.
I love the imagery here because water, by its very physical nature, wants to flow together. It seeks the lowest point and merges. To force water to stand up like two solid walls, that goes against its fundamental essence. You are bending the rigid laws of physics.
Exactly.
But human beings are the exact opposite. By our nature, we have our own egos, our own desires, and a whole lot more than 1/64th of pride. We want to stand apart. To take two free-willed, distinct individuals and force their lives to flow perfectly together in harmony, you are bending human nature itself.
You've hit the nail on the head. Forcing water apart is an anti-nature miracle. Forcing two human egos to genuinely compromise and unite is an anti-nature miracle of the exact same magnitude. The text considers aligning two free wills, without breaking either of them, to be a daily divine miracle.
Wow.
Which takes us right back to the beginning of our entire deep dive today.
It all circles back.
It does. Marriage, in this framework, isn't just about two people coexisting in the same space. It's about navigating the immense friction of two human egos. It requires the explicit, clear boundaries of kinui to prevent resentment.
Yes.
It requires intense vulnerability, and most importantly, it requires the humility to be like soft flesh rather than hard earth, yielding to each other rather than shattering at the first impact.
We started this deep dive looking at what seemed like, a dusty, archaic ritual for a suspected adulteress. We expected archaic laws. Instead, we uncovered a comprehensive worldview.
A completely different way of looking at relationships.
Exactly. We found a system where trust demands explicit boundaries, not silent suspicion, where public humiliation was leveraged not out of cruelty, but as a desperate tool to force the truth to the surface, because truth is fundamentally more sacred than ego.
It prioritizes what actually matters.
We discovered a psychology that recognizes humility as the only vehicle for healing, and a universe that perfectly, poetically mirrors our choices back to us, measure for measure.
It really reframes how you perceive your own daily interactions. Every boundary you set, every moment of pride you indulge is sending a ripple out into that cosmic mirror.
And on that note, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we explored today. In the midst of the Talmud's intense discussion about pride and the desperate need for confession, the text briefly mentions a famous biblical figure named Judah.
The story of Judah and Tamar.
Yes. Judah found himself in a horrifying situation where his daughter-in-law, Tamar, was about to be executed for a crime. Judah, as the patriarch, was the one who condemned her. But at the very last second, evidence was produced, and Judah suddenly realized that he was actually the one at fault.
His own actions had forced her hand.
Right. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying public reckoning for him. Judah was a powerful leader. He had every reason to stay quiet. He could have easily let her die to protect his reputation, his authority, and his pride.
He could have been the hard earth.
Exactly. But instead, he promptly confessed his own devastating mistake. He stood up in front of everyone and famously declared, "She is more righteous than I."
A massive admission.
The commentators tell us that because Judah traded his massive pride for the bitter truth, because he changed to be vulnerable like soft flesh rather than unyielding like hard earth, his descendants were rewarded with kingship. The entire royal line of David eventually came from him.
Measure for measure.
Measure for measure. So here is the challenge for you to take away from this deep dive. Think about your own life. Think about the boundaries you've established or the ones you've been too afraid to voice. What is a truth you might be hiding right now just to protect your own pride? What mistake are you holding on to out of a fear of humiliation? And more importantly, what kind of personal kingship, what kind of ultimate freedom and peace could you unlock if you simply chose to be radically honest?